Welcome to the Pike County Report. I'm your host, Brandon Roberts, and with me as always is Judge Executive Wayne T. Rutherford, and also with us today is Office of Energy and Community Development Director, Mr. Charles Carlton. And Judge and Charles, you can't mention Kentucky without mentioning coal, and you can't mention coal without mentioning Pike County. And where do you gentlemen?
Brandon, Pike County is, if we were a state, we would be 10th in coal production in the United States. And on natural gas, we are the leading producer in Kentucky. We produce 53% of the natural gas that's produced in this Commonwealth. So the Lord has blessed us, and we are an energy-rich county. And what we've done, this administration, we've acted like we was. That never happened before. The first thing we did was trademark America's energy capital. And that has been trademarked. It took us a while to get that, jump through the hoops, get through the red tape. But we trademarked that. That has caused Pike County. And then we had Ken Nemeth from the Southern Energy Board that was up here to an ARC conference in 2006 over to the Expo Center. And I had a conversation with him. I had not come back into office at that time. And we was talking about the coal that's produced in this county, and we were talking about the natural gas. And then after I was elected, I looked up one day, and here came Ken Nemeth, the fellow I had the conversation with, who was the main speaker at the ARC conference on energy. And he came in and said, "Judge, I want to do an energy strategy for Pike County, Kentucky. I have never found a place in this country, and I've been all over this country, and I've traveled the world, that is energy rich as Pike County, Kentucky." So the Southern Energy Board, which is made up, I think, Brandon, of about 13 states and 2 Puerto Rico and somewhere else, that's a controlled area of the United States, and the governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky is a member of that board. So they did us an energy strategy. We was the only local government in America at that time that had an energy strategy. Not even our federal government in Washington had arrived at an energy strategy, and they haven't yet, really. And the Commonwealth of Kentucky didn't have an energy strategy at that time. Now later, Kentucky put out, and we have it in our file. Charles refers to it in his work every once in a while, of their strategy on energy for Kentucky, and which primarily is Central Appalachia. But when we got that energy strategy, that led us to many trips around this country. We have been to the United States Energy Office, the head of that agency, the head of their fossil fuel division, their biomass division. We have been to the Pentagon. We've been to the Pentagon, and that was some trip, Charles.
Yes.
Getting through security, of even getting into that building was something. If you went to the bathroom, they sent somebody with you. But that led us not only to the Pentagon, but it led us to the Appalachian Regional Commission. And we talked to the 2 co-chairs at that time of the Appalachian Regional Commission. We met with them. Then I went the following year to Athens, Ohio, and attended that ARC conference, which is held somewhere in the Appalachian region from New York to Mississippi every year. Athens, Ohio, I had the opportunity to meet with those officials there. And Charles, I remember when you and I went out to Roanoke, Virginia, and attended that on wind. That primarily was a wind. But ironically, the fellow who headed that up was the same fellow that I'd met with in the group in Washington. But Pentagon has said we need to solve this for security reasons. And also, we brought back from Washington with us a security briefing that had been put out for the federal government that said until we solved our energy problem, and that we was relying on governments that didn't like us. We was getting our oil. We're getting around 70%, I read the other day, Charles, of our oil imported, and a lot of that comes from countries that would want to even kill us, and that we need to use our domestic energy that we have and solve this problem. So we have worked and worked and worked. But what I want to do with this program today is start basically of what we have and our coal reserve. Coal is it's the number one industry. It is, and I'll use the word trademark again. It is a trademark industry of this Commonwealth. We have kept the lights on in this country all these years, and I know that when I was growing up, Charles, they gave the coal industry and the coal miners credit for winning World War I and World War II because they had to produce coal to make the armature, and we had metallurgical coal that they used in the process completely, I guess, at that time before new technology to make steel and other products that made so that we could fight the wars. So what the coal industry and the coal miner has contributed and what they have to go through today from this liberal press, and especially from this administration in Washington, who has put EPA on the Central Appalachian coal industry. And I hope we can have a little bit of discussion later in this conversation about EPA and what they're doing, not only to the coal industry, but the users of the coal that's produced from Central Appalachia. But Charles, we have been blessed in Pike County to have this coal in these mountains, and a lot of our coal after coal, and I'll use the word discovered because if you read history in the late 1800s, I know that I can remember in 1970 when Herbie Deskins and I went to the head of Bear Fork here in Pike County to a cemetery that had a controversy and a road problem. And we went up there, Charles, would you believe that their tombstones was made from coal back in the 1800s?
Well,
they did not know what coal was to be used for, but they knew that what they got down, it was shiny, you could shine it up. And they knew if it was hard enough coal that they could edge a name out of it. It wasn't perfect letters, but you could read. I remember one name was Ellick, and we could make that out. And the next part was Johnson. We could tell because it had the J and the A, but they was making tombstones out of coal. So I'll use the word coal was discovered. And the coal seams, and Charles Carlton, your background has been varied in the academic side, and the coal industry side. Right. And Charles had been in the coal industry himself. He'd done various research over the years in the production of coal, the use of coal, and all. But give us a little lesson today on the coal reserve that we have here in Central Appalachian, especially in Pike County.
Well, Pike County is blessed with some of the largest reserves in the eastern United States, and produces approximately 25% of all the coal that's mined in the state of Kentucky. And so we have a considerable amount of reserve still remaining, and while there has been discussion in the press of a decline in production in the Central Appalachian area, that will tend, in my opinion, to be on the more marginal areas, and Pike County as a core coal producing county will not experience those declines that are predicted to the level that the press to some extent is fear-mongering. So I think that we have a very high amount of remaining reserve here in the county, and we have seams that have not been exploited because of cost and because of depth, but will be for future years.
You think, and a lot of our coal now is subsurface.
Yes.
And we've been blessed with our coal seams to be above the water level because we had the mountains. And just take Buchanan County, Virginia, a county that you're familiar with, And those 6 counties over there in Virginia, most of their coal since the early 1800s have been subsurface because they didn't have the seams up. But our coal, till about, what, 20, 25 years ago,
Yes.
that we started going subsurface over here. But we had seams of coal and metallurgical coal. Give the general public on metallurgical coal and what it's used for.
Metallurgical coal can be used 2 different ways, and the term encompasses both. One is for the more modern steel making process where you use a very hard, low sulfur coal for pulverized coal injections. And that is used in furnaces, and that is one method. The older method is which is very common, is to produce coke. Coke is where the volatile matter in coal has been burned off and leaving essentially the carbon. In order to produce a stable coke, practically all coke is produced from a blend of high volatile and low volatile coals to create a mid-volatile, stable, hard coke. And you will see along the railroad tracks something that appears that may have fallen from a railroad car that looks like lava. That is a piece of coke.
We used to call that canker when we picked it up in the railroad yard at Shelby. Here's a piece of canker coal. Right. And that's what he's talking about. It looked like lava. But on the metallurgical coal, Kentucky produces more raw aluminum than any other state in the United States. And that's because of our coal industry and our energy that we have in Kentucky, and especially here in Central Appalachia and Pike County.
Well, it certainly is, and the aluminum industry uses a tremendous amount of electricity in ore reduction and in the smelting and refining of aluminum. And so having low cost electricity is very, very important for aluminum.
Charles, I have spent a part of my tenure as judge fighting the utility rates for individuals who has to pay a bill, and I've told this story before the Public Service Commission. I went down there one time and I told that Public Service Commission, just close your eyes a minute and I want to take you on a trip back to Pike County. And I want to give you a little lady with a bonnet on who gets her cane and heads to the post office, which is just down the road. And she goes to the post office and gets her mail. And in that mail is what they call a power bill, a pay her utilities. And she takes it back home. She goes in and sits at the kitchen table, opens it up, and looks at it, and has to make a decision of whether she buys medicine, food, or pays her utility bill. Now, by us having this energy in Kentucky, and I believe Kentucky, if I remember right, Brandon, I think in the research that you had done, that we was third in the lowest utility rates in the country. I think we're pretty well correct that Brandon's research showed that. So we are blessed to have coal. We contribute. Let's talk about electric generation plants. We always talk about that we have lit up America for all these years. We fought the war with what we produced. But the main thing is that the greatest industrial revolution in the history of the world, the greatest revolution in the history of the world, was fueled by coal, and that was the industrial revolution that this country went through for 40 to 50 years, half a century. And it was fueled by coal. And what that's meant to this country. But talk about the power plants and how the coal is used in the power plant. And I know you and I have had a conversation, and I know that when they had the public hearing here in Pikeville, I predicted at that time that American Electric Power would be closing the Big Sandy plant and not use Central Appalachian coal in the future because of they had gone and spent millions of dollars on tugboats to pull the western coal in down the Mississippi, up the Ohio, and that they would do that. Well, that happened, and we heard a few months ago, and I just read last week that they had give a year reprieve on that. Am I correct? Give us a little background of what our coal has meant to the person out there with his power bill, and keeping the lights on and the running of industry in this country.
Well, historically, at least since about 1962, with the building of the Big Sandy plant, which is the single plant that supplies Kentucky Power Company, other than power that they purchase from the American Electric Power System, we've been blessed by having a plant that's relatively close to coal reserves that allowed for low-cost coal to go in, be efficiently converted to power, and has helped to hold down, for the last 40 years, electrical rates in this area. However, we're in a situation where, one, there have been substantial demands on power companies in the United States to convert and move away from coal through actions of the EPA in imposing environmental standards on the use of coal. And two, we have a situation where a company such as American Electric Power, with the largest consumer of coal in the Western Hemisphere, both North and South America, a typical burn for them is about 76 to 78 million tons per year.
Charles, you attended their yearly board meeting in Columbus, didn't you, about, what, 2 years ago?
Well, it was a special, I went as a representative and met with the corporate officers and the president of AEP, yes,
Yeah.
chairman of the board.
Go ahead.
And came to understand some of the reasons for why they have had to take certain actions. One of the reasons that we've had coal plants being closed is that many of the coal plants that they have are reaching the end of their economic lifetime. They're in the 40 and 50 year range, and equipment wears out.
Sure.
And it doesn't become, it's not economically efficient to keep repairing equipment once it gets to a certain state. So the second thing that's also occurred in the United States is that we had a massive recession in 2008. On any given day, AEP, for example, has about 42,000 megawatts available, which is a tremendous amount of power, but their normal system sale is about 36,000. Yeah. So there's about 6,000 megawatts that just doesn't have a home, and it just never gets started up and doesn't get produced because principally because industrial production is down in the United States due to the recession. So they're in a position where they would have to retire some coal plants because of lack of demand. But that is being exacerbated because at the same time they're under substantial pressure as many other utilities such as TVA, such as Progress Energy in North Carolina. We could keep reciting, but each of these have been major consumers of coal from this region, and in particular from Pike County. So we're at a situation where the EPA, in order to meet overall emission standards, the use of natural gas for new plant construction is becoming much more common, in particular also because the price of natural gas, due to increased production from the Marcellus Shale to the north of here in Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia, has brought on a lot of natural gas, And horizontal drilling in this area here in the Devonian Shale has also made available low-cost natural gas. So utilities are looking at converting plants to natural gas based upon cost, because the capital cost for a power plant that's coal related is much higher than for a comparable natural gas plant of the same megawattage capacity.
Tell us the difference in the price of coal per ton and the cubic foot of natural gas.
Correct. And
coal cheaper.
Coal has been cheaper, but natural gas prices have declined. Even just about 3 years ago, in this area, many people were receiving about 12 natural gas prices on royalties based upon about $12 to $13 a thousand cubic feet, and now we're down in the $3 and $4 range.
We've heard the discussion for a while from the utility industry about the scrubbers.
Yes.
Give us a little synopsis of the scrubbers and the cost and what it costs the utility to clean up and what they can clean up. Now the CO2, the carbon, I understand with the scrubber that don't get that.
That's correct.
Go right ahead.
What a scrubber does is really allows them to remove, to take care of the problem that used to be popular to be referred to as acid rain.
You're correct.
To remove sulfur, where it's combined with water particles and makes a dilute sulfuric acid, very dilute. But the scrubbers have been very good about reducing emissions here in the United States. They also remove other particles that are mercury and so on, and allow it to be trapped with limestone particles, and they're very efficient. But they've had also a peculiar consequence, of maybe in a sense an unintended consequence, that scrubbers really operate much better on high sulfur coal than they do on low sulfur coal. We have been blessed here by having low sulfur coal, which has gone to plants that did not need to have scrubbers. But once you install a scrubber, you are better off using a source of high sulfur coal than you are low sulfur coal, because the scrubber itself will operate more efficiently than it would on low sulfur.
I'd like to interject here for a minute. Both Judge and Charles, both of you mentioned the EPA already several times.
Yes.
One of the things that we had intended on discussing was the EPA regulations and what it's doing to hamper the coal industry. Charles, what can we do about this? I mean, what has to be done?
Well, one thing that the United States is going to have to recognize is that in order to have energy independence, we can't end up destroying the energy sources that we have that are native to this area. So that's one first as a policy decision that needs to be made.
And 22% of the coal in the world is in reserve in the United States of America. Imagine that. China number one, and we're number two, aren't we, Charles?
Very likely.
Very likely. And we got to have a balance between the economy and the ecology. People have got to realize that if we're going to be secure, it is a national security issue. No doubt about that. Today, it's a national security issue. And yet you have the burden of the leadership in the EPA in Washington, who is Mrs. Jackson and her crowd. And they have done nothing but only these regulations they put in place is in Central Appalachia. And you got to remember that Pike County, Kentucky is the leading producer in Central Appalachia of coal. So it's certainly harder on us than it is any other area in Central Appalachia. So we are very much concerned about it. They are legislation in Washington to back off with these regulations. You know, it was we had this discussion recently when Greece and Spain looked like they was going to go under, and the European system said, we'll bail you out. But there's one thing you've got to do. You've got to have a balanced budget amendment in 1 year. The second thing was, you got to do away with about 40% of your regulations you put on, because industry can't provide what's needed to run the country and provide jobs for people. So we've got to come to realize that we have got to produce coal. And we talked about these seams, Charles, and mountaintop development. That's what I've always called it, but we don't have any level land to develop on here. Normally we have about 17 to 24%, if I've looked at it correctly, of level land. Usually it's next to a river and it's a bottom. Well, about 11 or 12% of that is in the floodplain. Then normally you have a road. People have to have a road to travel. Then you have a railroad, and where there are railroads, and then you have a cemetery, and then you have a mountain. We don't have any place to go. So what I'm getting to, that you have these thin seams of coal up on these mountains, and the only way you can get it out is by mountaintop removal and that type of mining. That's the only way it's financially feasible. Charles, that type of coal is not metallurgical coal, is it most of the time? It is what we call a steam coal.
Correct.
Go ahead and explain to them what that is and what that's used for.
Well, as Judge says, it's steam coal. It's another term for it in the coal industry, thermal coal. It is used because of its heat value, not because of other properties that are useful for making coke. We're blessed with seams of relatively high heat value as compared with western United States.
Even western Kentucky coal don't have that.
Western Kentucky coal is weaker than the coal here, tends to be higher sulfur, which is the virtue that has brought the western Kentucky coal fields back.
And they're in the Illinois basin.
That is correct.
The western coal is in that Illinois basin, and and we wonder sometimes if that's the EPA problem with us, is the Illinois coal basin. They've made it relatively easy for them to take over our market, let alone the Wyoming and the western coal that we have to contend with. And the utility companies have their own barge companies right in-house is hauling and running big magazine articles that read how much money and what a fine system we got of getting coal in. And you know, I can remember appearing before the Public Service Commission several years ago when they built the coal-fired plant across the bridge at Owensboro, Kentucky in Indiana. And Brandon, the Public Service Commission at that time charged us a fee to build that plant because it was going in the grid to provide us. And of course, I went down there and opposed it. I wasn't even in a public office at that time. I was president of the Mountain Truckers Association. But I showed up over there and said, my mother is on a set income up in Pike County, Kentucky, and you all are going to raise her rates to pay for a power plant and not using Kentucky coal, not even using Kentucky coal. They was using the coal coming from Wyoming and bringing it down the Mississippi up the Ohio River right to across from Owensboro. But we paid, the people in this area paid a fee for years that they put on our bill to construct that plant. So in this coal industry, and we've just completed a comprehensive plan for Pike County. Charles, you was intricately involved in that. You spent hours with these folks. It was, we contracted with R.W. Armstrong and Company, Indianapolis, Indiana. We did that because we wanted to develop this county in the future simply for jobs, Brendan. So your children in the future and grandchildren and ours, and, that they could be born in Pike County, Central Appalachia, these counties in Central Appalachia. And then they could get in to go to grade school, high school here, and then go get a college education. And what had happened, Charles, over the years, as we all know, when they went off to these college universities, they didn't come back because we had no job for them. We lost that brain power that educated people would have. And so we decided that we would develop this county and our energy strategy that Ken Nemeth and his people put together for us, then take an R.W. Armstrong and their comprehensive plan, and we just got that plan back about 2 months ago. The completion of it took, what, a year and a half or maybe
Correct.
2 years for them to complete that plan. They interviewed what they call stakeholders here. That's people from our community, the leadership in our community, of what they wanted this county to look like in the future. Then they come up to help us have a development plan around our energy, our coal, our gas, our oil, and so we have that plan. This R.W. Armstrong company is the company that's building the Green Island at Abu Dhabi. And I know Charles recently, we were going to get to biomass later, but recently one of the representatives with this company of R.W. Armstrong sent Charles an email, and I don't know what's the language in Guam? You remember? Not Guamanese, but they sent Charles an email, and they was 14 hours different than us. I was learning the time.
Chamorro.
Yeah, Taburo is a
Chamorro.
was the English, and part of Charles' message was in Tamora, and knowing Charles, and I was right, he goes and writes him back an email, and he ends it in tomorrow. I knew Charles Carlton good enough to know that he wasn't going to let zig by with that with this company over there. But this comprehensive plan and the plan we put together is to build this county around our energy that we have while we have it, and I've given the background on all the travel we've done, and we have put a lot of hours in the last few years in coal to liquid, and I know I've brought in from that I keep behind my desk, and I know that they might even want that's Fisher Trope. Fisher Trope is the old process that I don't know where it came from, but Hitler used it during the Second World War when we cut off his petroleum, and he couldn't get petroleum, so they had the leading scientists and researchers in the world at that time. And matter of fact, we ended up getting most of them after we won the war to come over here, and we had the gentleman headed up our agency was the head of their agency in Germany at that time. But the Fisher Trope process was to change coal, biomass. They did it with not only coal, but they did it with potatoes and other biomass types, and fought the war. Of course, we won that war, and thank God we did, and kept this country free and the right for us to be here on this program today. But we have worked with the University of Kentucky, Dr. Andrews, and we have good relationships with and good partnerships, and been very fortunate to build a partnership with our help of our congressional delegations in Washington with Oak Ridge National Laboratories. Mm-hmm. And we just returned recently, Charles and I, with meeting with them, getting their input in our programs that we have around energy, and getting them up to date on what we was doing, getting up to date what's going on in the world in regard to the energy situation as we find it in the world today. Fisher Trope, we have tried and tried and tried to get the economics to work on this. And finally, Charles Carlton, you came up with another process by finding out that there was a plane over here in West Virginia, and they was using a different process, and we had read about it in the paper. We had met with some of their people and got input. Our engineers had met with their engineers, and what was the new process that was a patent that was owned?
Well, the West Virginia plant, which is planned for Mingo County, is very interesting because it is really based upon something 40 years more advanced than the Fisher Tropes process. It is a process developed by ExxonMobil Corporation, and it it goes in a fairly simple process of first gasification of coal, which is well understood how to do, then taking the synthetic gas that is produced, converting that to methanol, then stripping the methanol, because methanol attracts water, as we all know, because that's what you use to get water out of your gas tank.
Yep.
Is some methanol, but strip the water from the methanol, now taking a pure methanol, and then converting methanol to gasoline. And when you do, you get a virtually zero sulfur, zero benzene gasoline. And this plant can operate either with a feed from natural gas or from coal in reality, because the first plant that was built in the world using the process was in 1985 in New Zealand, and that plant operated with a supply of natural gas being converted to gasoline. When you add a gasifier in front of the plant as the first stage to produce a synthetic natural gas, then you use coal. The plant in Mingo County is intended to use 2.7 million tons of coal to produce 18,000 barrels per day of gasoline, and that's 756,000 gallons a day.
There are no coal to liquid plants in the United States today.
Correct.
Zero. And if we was able to, and we've worked hard trying to pull this together, if sometime in the future, if we was able to say this county we could provide the energy for 2 plants, even the size of this county, that would mean that those figures that you had would be 3 times them. And imagine how many gallons would that be if we would, off the top of your head?
Well, you'd be running about 2.3 million gallons a day of gasoline coming out of this area of the country.
Now, Pike County, we're not new in the liquefaction gasification business. Back in the 70s, Congressman Perkins was a congressman at that time, and I was able to go to Washington when the Department of Energy was starting to build 144 plants in the country. And Pike County, we was able to get a pilot plant, $11 or $12 million plant, here in Pike County at Robinson Creek. Then once that pilot plant was going and we had the air permits, what we had to do is get the air permits and so forth. Then we was to get a $333 million plant in the area. But things changed quickly. The natural gas prices came down. They said they had a shortage of natural gas. Finally, they said they didn't. They changed administrations, and of the 144 plants, 1 is all survived. And that was a natural gas plant, coal to natural gas, lignite coal in North Dakota, Beulah, North Dakota. Able to visit that plant 3 years ago with the officials from Tampa Power and Electric. We know their local company that produces, one of our largest producers, which is TECO. But we was able to go to Beulah, North Dakota, and Charles, it surprised me what lignite looked like. It looked like our slate.
Yes.
It's just like gray rock to me. I mean, and they, when we flew in up there in their corporate jet, it was the largest plane that ever landed at that small airport. And we had a crowd while we would gone over to have our meeting with them, come back looking at that little small jet, I thought, but they'd never seen one that big there in Beulah, that little town over from that Beulah, North Dakota. And Charles, it surprised us when we talked to that manager and said, what do you start these people out with this plant? He said, first thing we do, we get them an associate degree over at Bismarck State. Bismarck State, we pay for it. They agree to work for us for a number of years. We start them out $50,000 a year. They provide for 5 states all the energy to heat in 5 states up there of changing lignite coal into natural gas. Now, One thing we found, we said, what are you doing with that bad stuff that goes into the air, toxic, kills people? What are you doing with it? They said, we're sequestering it, sequestration. We capture it, we put it in a pipeline, and we sell it to the Wellington oil fields, Charles, up in Saskatchewan, Canada, 220 miles. We get $50 a cubic for it. They're selling that. That absolutely surprised us, and that led us to a relationship here in Kentucky to ask Kentucky Geological Survey that if they would do a study, and they agreed to, Western Kentucky, Northern Kentucky around Maysville, and Eastern Kentucky. And I continue to say that we're always the tail that wags the dog. We was the last one they started on, and us with the most reserve, producing more natural gas than all the other 119 counties together. And their study got started late, and they had wells here that TECO was cooperating with them. I think Mr. Kinzer was cooperating with them, and
Correct.
others, companies, small companies at that time, Interstate, Mr. Littlefick's company, and all of them, they was cooperating with them. And then tell what we know today about our sequestration, what they was doing in Canada, Saskatchewan, Brandon, they was putting this in the ground, getting more oil production out. So what we said, why can't you put it in the ground and get more natural gas out? So then they started the studies here in Kentucky. There's the one in Western Kentucky completed, I understand. The one at Maysville completed. Ours is ongoing. Charles, what do you tell us
Well,
about it?
Brandon Nuttall of Kentucky Geological Survey is the project director, and we had to shift the location from Pike County to Johnson County because the well that had for the injection in Pike County was going to interfere with a mine development. And so very graciously, one of our local gas companies made available a comparable well in Johnson County, so the work goes on ahead. And the purpose of the project is to determine if we can increase gas production by injecting carbon dioxide into a well and then forcing ahead of it the natural gas and lead to increased gas extraction. And that is the well in the deep wells in West Kentucky and toward Maysville are to look at storage of carbon dioxide in deep formations down around 8,000 feet down. The gas production well here is to look at the use of CO2, which has been commonly used in oil wells to increase production. It's routinely used in Texas, Saskatchewan, so on, throughout the world to do it, to look and see if it will work also for natural gas, and theoretically it should.
Yeah. We're moving into natural gas, and I know that one of the things that Charles has given a lot of his time to, Brandon, is EQT, which was ectable gas. We was able to attract EQT to come to Pike County for a regional headquarters. And the reason we was able to do that because we are the leading producer, and they control, own or lease about 3 million acres in Central Appalachia. Most of that, Charles, is in Kentucky, and a lot of it, we have 6,500 plus natural gas wells, and half of those belong to approximately to ectable gas or EQT. So Charles, you have spent endless hours, and trip after trip, we've been everywhere, attempting to promote Pike County as the energy capital, and I think with EQT this paid off. Tell us about where we stand on construction of their regional headquarters, and I know we deal with Pittsburgh. That's where their national headquarters is. And I know the time that we've spent, and it's going to pay off well. If I remember, it's around 50 jobs at around $55,000 a job. If I read what I read recently, and I understand that 26 of those jobs has already been here. And let me say that our local industrial board, the Ideal Board, Charles and I, and the county government, we don't do anything unless we keep them appraised of what's going on as we work to bring jobs to this county. We are in total partnership with the Ideal Board, with the chairman is Kitty Bird, and the board is a very active board. You have John Elliott and Mr. Blackburn and Governor Patton and Mr. Billiter and Mr. Hensley, and of course you have the chairman. And I know even they had a meeting, Dave, this week, and you updated them again on other projects that we're working on to bring jobs related to industry here. So give us an update on where we stand on EQT's regional headquarters.
EQT building is, in fact, Mayor, slightly ahead of schedule. Is scheduled to be finished the week of January the 6th, and be ready for transfer of people to that site, which would take during the last 3 weeks of January, and hopefully they will be in their building and at their desk by February the 1st. You actually have two buildings going up. One is the office building, and the second is a warehouse building, and it's also for a service of equipment. In front of that is a pipe yard, and then there's a large parking lot for personnel that'll be on site at the office building. Interestingly enough, while the building is being constructed, a natural gas generator is on site and it is hooked to a well that's right in front of the building, and so we've been generating electric power over there using natural gas during the construction, Judge.
I know, Charles, some time ago when we looked at the drawings of that area, there was also a LNG station to go next door to that, and that's was right on their drawings that they came out of Pittsburgh with. Am I correct?
Well, actually, it's a CNG station.
CNG, which is the
compressed natural gas. We're hopeful that something will develop along that line. EQT has two CNG stations in the Pittsburgh area servicing, one services primarily their needs, one services primarily the public, and also the transportation network for bus service in the Pittsburgh area.
I think our friends in Frankfort Department of Energy told us recently that'll be the first that'll be the first station in Kentucky.
If it comes about, it would be, yes.
Yeah, in Kentucky.
Charles, Judge mentioned the countless hours you'd spent at EQT. For a period of time there, every morning as I was coming into work, you were leaving, going to Harlan County to the liquid natural gas powered rock truck they were testing down there.
Charles, we need to start and tell how we found these four different companies and brought them together in this county. And Charles will tell us too, Brandon, where they was doing their research when we found them. And Charles found them, and then Cargill Corporation, which we had been corresponding with, they recommended them, and to tell them what has transpired with our relationship with these companies. And
well, Gaseous Fuel Systems of Western Florida is the company that the judge is alluding to. There's a subsidiary of Black River Investment, which is the $5 billion investment arm of Cargill, which is one of the largest grain companies in the world. Cargill, of course, uses a tremendous amount of natural gas in drying grain, so they have an interest in natural gas and the potential for natural gas. The Gaseous Fuel Systems had been conducting tests in Thailand and in South America on heavy equipment, and I located the company. We invited them here. We had many discussions, put them together with a local operator, and someone I knew from the coal business, and which led to the use of his equipment in Harlan County because one, he could provide a site for we could have testing of a Cat 777 rock truck operating on liquefied natural gas. And that was the first time that a piece of construction machinery operating on liquefied natural gas was used in North America, and successfully. And so he built a test track, in effect, on the refuse site, which is the largest site in Kentucky. Gave you a constant haul, constant grade under conditions, and so the engineers installed the equipment, converted the truck, and from that we're now at a situation where in January there will be 3 trucks operating for Alpha Natural Resources in Wyoming, Cat 793 trucks that will be operating with liquefied natural gas. And you may ask, why would you be using natural gas in a rock truck? Well, when you substitute approximately 50% to 60% natural gas, one effect is that you reduce the emissions and extend the oil life for the engine. But most importantly, what happens is, due to the fact that the cost for 1 million BTUs that come from natural gas as opposed to a petroleum product such as diesel fuel, you end up saving in the range of 40 to 50% of your operating costs in running that vehicle.
We work with TECO. Tell them about TECO, how much they would save a year just in their Pike County operation.
TECO, we did a estimation based upon use in coal trucks and the use in rock trucks and other heavy equipment on TECO jobs here in this county, and it would have about a $1.7 million per year bottom line savings, which is a considerable amount of money.
Considerable amount of money.
Yes.
Charles, I remember you went down to the first testing they was going to do. Charles walked back in the office and he said they had to stop the testing today, and I said, oh no. He said, oh, wait a minute, it's not bad, it's good. He said it was running too good when it got up to pull up the hill, and they had to stop it because they had to come in and change the computer. So explain to them how that testing and how it worked.
Well, the way the rock truck is set is that it's operating at about 60% natural gas, 40% diesel fuel, and the diesel fuel in the cylinder is maintaining also for lubrication purposes. So when you're carrying a load uphill, you're running on 60% natural gas. When you're on the level running forward, you're doing 60. But when you start to descend and the engine is just on a jake brake, it's running on straight diesel fuel. And when you back up, you're on diesel fuel. But you have what's called a fuel map, and the computer that's added is taking the engine sensors and apportioning the fuel based upon whether the truck, what it's doing, whether it's moving, what angle it's on. It also has a sensor that's determining, in the event of a rollover, to cut off the fuel, all fuel supply, in the event an accident should occur. It has a sensor for the weight that is on the truck, and the computer is constantly calculating based upon the throttle position of the driver when he presses down the throttle how much fuel to send to the engine. And what it does is it selects the correct blend and does that. Interestingly enough, you're thinking that the engine has to be heavily modified, but really it's extremely simple because there is no internal modification to the engine at all.
Sure.
All that happens is, ahead of the turbocharger for the engine, there's a vaporizer unit, a ring that's put in the air inlet, and 3% natural gas. Just ahead of the turbocharger is injected with the incoming air, and the fuel-air mixture is adjusted accordingly, and that's all that really happens.
Charles, I know that this company was doing some research in Colombia, South America, prior to this, and I think with Pike County's work, Pike County government, yours and everybody else's, they're now in the United States of America doing their research.
Yes.
And it's a Pike County project, even though it's been in Harlan County, and we appreciate the coal operator who provided the truck. He formerly was in coal business here. He formerly lived here in Pikeville, and we appreciate his.
And he was formerly my boss.
And so it has been a good relationship. I know that we had Jose Vargas here from Colombia. Tell us about the company that he's with, how much coal they mine. He was here. You went. Yes. He stayed here in the motel in Pikeville, and you took him down to Harlan County the next day.
Yes. Gerardo Vargas is the director of maintenance for El Cerrón mine in Colombia. That is the largest open pit mine in South America, and it produces this last year 32 million metric tons, which is about 35 million tons of hard coal from about 13 seams and in the Andes, and it's an extremely productive mine. They operate with about 220, 240 ton trucks hauling both coal and hauling rock in this pit. And this mine, Coal Age for this month, have an announcement that the mine production will be increased by about 15%. So when the first day that the truck was available for viewing, Mr. Vargas flew from South America and came to Pikeville, Kentucky to go get ready to go to Harlan County to go visit the truck, because if TECO could save 1.7 million, believe me, when you've got 220 in a pit, there's an awful lot of savings that could be had.
Now, then about 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, you had another visitor from the third largest gold mine in the world.
Correct.
And you took him to Harlan County, and he came to Pikeville, Kentucky, stayed here. You took him down there. Who was he?
Well, Barrick Gold Company. But I think that anybody that's to moving large volumes of material with really heavy trucks, the one advantage of focusing on construction equipment or mining equipment is that these trucks, you do not have to set up a specialized fuel delivery system, because they're really not going any great distance away from their own fuel supply. So it's possible to put in a liquefied natural gas for them at relatively lower cost and to put it on site. And so that's the natural point to begin. And the second thing is that you're dealing in such large horsepowers that that the amount of payoff is really immediate, as opposed to where we typically think about, well, let's look at using a Honda Civic with natural gas. And Honda, by the way, does make such a vehicle. But it takes an awful lot of Civics to add up to a 793 rock truck.
And a bulldozer. Now, especially in the gold process that they do, they process 100%.
Yes.
Don't they? And imagine what that would do to their bottom line.
Yes.
If you cut 50% of their energy cost of fuel for their dozers and their, what size trucks do they use in that?
They use the largest trucks in the world.
Largest ones in the world.
The other thing that there's also interest in companies that are in solid waste using this, because they have a source of methane typically at landfills, and so we're working on the development of a package for the CAT dozer line to be able to operate also with natural gas.
We're talking about natural gas right now, and We know with 6,500 natural gas wells in this,
Yes.
this one county, that there are lines all over this county. And I can remember back 2.5 years ago, or whenever, that I said, Charles, get us a list from Dr. Andrews at UK Energy office and their research center of all the people that's in the business of providing. And Charles brought that list back, surprised us, but it was about that thick. I said, pick you 25 out and send them a letter and tell them we're the energy capital of the world, and tell them the natural gas that we produce. And we would like to, our situation, and I want you to explain this. In the past, our situation has been to send our natural gas out here to the north. You've a little bit related to what's happened in 2011 and this period in this country, that it switched to the south.
Correct.
So explain that a little bit so people will understand what we did. Charles found the company. We sent 25 letters out. We got a response back real quick from a company out of Houston, Texas, and they came up here and met with us. We was the facilitator of holding 2 to 3 meetings after that with our local gas association, Brandon, and with our state gas association, and with our independent local Central Appalachia, not only this county, we brought them all in, because what we do here in energy affects all of Central Appalachia, really, especially these counties of eastern Kentucky. But Charles, we facilitated these meetings. Tell us about what happened in regard to that after we got involved into the pipeline.
Well, the company that the judge is referring to is Spectra from Houston. Of course, we had visits from Spectra here. Out of this, we had discussions with local gas producers and with Spectra about availability of gas supplies in this area, to look at supplying potential users in the southern United States. They have a major they're one of the major pipeline companies in the United States, coming from the Gulf, headed to the northeast, and also across Canada. They own, in particular, the East Tennessee pipeline system coming up through from Knoxville to Roanoke, and has a lateral that comes back to Jewel Ridge, Virginia, in Buchanan County.
That's our neighboring county. Yeah.
Neighboring county in Virginia. Part of the discussions were about an extension of that line into this area. The upshot of it all is that Spectra came in and purchased the brand new pipeline that goes from Langley in Floyd County to Greenup from EQT, that they have renamed that the Big Sandy Pipeline. That is moving about 125,000 decatherms a day, which is a tremendous amount of gas, headed toward Greenup. And what is going on is events in our area in a peculiar way have been good for us, because when the TVA had their ash spill at John Sevier plant just north of Knoxville, TVA has decided to convert that plant to natural gas. So it could be that maybe we're going to end up supplying a good portion of that gas coming from here, headed down to East Tennessee. And they wanted to be in a position to where they could be a long-term, reliable supplier going into East Tennessee and increasing gas coming out of this area. And I think that that has happened, and hopefully if things work out, there will be a pipeline extension coming from Jewel Ridge, coming back into this central Appalachian area, also moving gas, which will, going in that direction, would allow natural gas to go from Jewel Ridge down to towards Saltville, which is one of the largest underground reservoirs for long-term storage of natural gas.
Is that in the old salt mines?
That is in the old salt facility. But if it happens that then whether it goes to that area or it moves a few miles to the east, it will still allow the movement of a large amount of gas from that area out of Pike County headed south. Progress Energy, which is former Carolina Power and Light, that will be converting several plants in western North Carolina to natural gas. And so I think that we have long-term the possibility of a large volume of gas headed south into western North Carolina. And that they've just finished the large Patriot pipeline that goes from near Saltville into western North Carolina, which is one of the largest pipeline projects in the east. So it is sort of logical that it's going to come on back a little bit further into the gas fields and pick up some more supply.
Now, we talk about raw gas. Explain to the people what we're talking about in raw gas, and explain to them how it's cleaned up, and that we do have a company here that's in that business in Pike County.
We have Mark West Hydrocarbon at Bowman that processes gas. When we produce gas coming out of the ground, it's really a mixture of gases. It's methane, butane, ethane, propane, so on. When we ship it onto a pipeline, we go through and chill this gas and separate the gas streams and remove water, remove any stray carbon dioxide, and end up with what's called pipeline quality gas, which is essentially methane. The other gases, all of which have a market, are then transported by truck from Bowman on down to near Greenham, and there they're processed and separated again into butane, ethane, propane, and so on, and then they ship by tank car from there. The largest item is propane. Ethane goes over for use in plastics, butane for cigarette lighters and other uses, and so on.
Charles, the environmentalist and EPA, we read all this liberal press all the time, and they really are starting to get on the natural gas industry the way they have coal. Talk to us about fracking. We hear all the damage it's been haven't been done to the water tables and so forth.
Well,
and the new technology that's here.
Well, one of the things is that it's sort of generic term. It's like saying, well, we're talking about coal mining. Well, there are all sorts of forms of coal mining. Well, there are all sorts of forms of fracking or fracturing. And what is done in this area of the country to stimulate production of natural gas is that you need to fracture the formation in order to create pores for the gas to move through. The fracking here is done by the use of liquid nitrogen.
But it had been done by water, and that's what EPA had been on.
EPA in northern West Virginia and Pennsylvania, they use hydraulic pressure from water. But we do not use that here. We use liquid nitrogen.
That's the reason you see all these trucks lined up when there are 9, 10, or 15 of them.
Yes.
On the road together. And the name of those companies there are two companies primarily that's in here.
Well, you see BJ, you see Ferris, you see Air Products.
And
there are others.
And there are others. And
but the one advantage is that when you use liquid nitrogen, you put it, it's 276 degrees below zero. When it's put down into the earth, it expands about 600 times, and of course that fractures the rock. Then you meter off and release the liquid nitrogen, and our atmosphere, and we're breathing 80% nitrogen at any moment. At any moment, our atmosphere is about 80%, rough number, of nitrogen. So
EPA can't get us on that one.
no, it's just putting back what was in the air to begin with.
And Charles, you said that that's actually the preferred method of fracking, isn't it?
Yes, it is in this area.
In this area. The Magellan, we've heard so much about the Magellan. We know that in West Virginia they're trying to get ready for another legislative session. Last session couldn't agree. Pennsylvania's had the problem, New York's had the problem, and trying to get ready for a new find. And ironically, all the maps that you and I have reviewed, it shows the Magellan not here where we're sitting in Pikeville, but ends over here to Phelps area. In the Phelps area. I mean, it's on every map we've looked at, everybody we've talked to, but that's not going to be a big payoff for us like it is these other states in Central Appalachia. But Charles, they are what's called the Utica. Correct. And you and I have had conversations in regard to this, and the other day you enlightened me about the Trenton. Explain to us what's going on in that. That's a new find, and it's a great, it looks like that's going to be, what it's going to do for this country and the production of energy is going to be unbelievable when you put it with the Magellan in the future.
Well, back when I was young, I mean, most of what, a lot of the gas production here, everyone, it came from the lime or it came from the Maxon sands, and those were you drilled about 1,000 feet, and that's about what you got to.
And it had good production, Devonian shale.
And the Devonian shale was not developed, and then then we developed the Devonian shale, and that's our major producer at this time. But there are other strata below there that have not been drilled and coming on to.
But don't we have a local company that's already done some drilling?
Yes.
Way down subsurface?
Yes, there have been wells.
Kinzer?
Yes, Mr. Kinzer has drilled some deeper wells. So I think that we have a long-term future in the natural gas business.
Judge, would you and Charles like to go on into alternative energy or continue that on?
Yes, we can. We'll be glad to talk about biomass, which is alternative energy, and we talked about the R.W. Armstrong. They have a company, Aggressy, and we have a relationship with them. We talked earlier about one of their representatives being in Guam, but we have a relationship with that company of changing garbage into ethanol for transportation fuel. So, Charles, we have that relationship, and we almost had that. This company came to us. We have our own landfill. We're the only legal licensed landfill in eastern Kentucky. They have one at London that's licensed. They have one on the Greenup-Boyd County line. Other than that, we got the only one, and we was attractive because we had a certain amount of garbage that we handle. Our landfill, Charles, has about 12 more years of use. It's very costly. We're into the fifth phase. Fifth phase cost us $5.8 million, the fifth phase did, and we were having to pay that off. That's to meet the state regulation and the federal regulation. And so we had the landfill, and we was able, that company came here and said, we don't want any local money, we don't want any state money, don't want any federal. And they had a package from Wall Street available when Wall Street fell. And I remember the morning that I watched television and they said Wall Street had fell, and I came to work. I opened Judge Hayes' door, which is connected to my office, and I said, Judge Hayes, we just lost our plane over there because Wall Street fell and everything hadn't been signed. And that's what happened. And then Charles and I have worked. We've used our video monitoring to meet with these folks and to keep up with them to what's going on. And so they have put this back on their front burner and trying to move this forward. Matter of fact, today is the 19th, looks like, today, and they were supposed to be in Washington maybe on the 14th, 15th, 16th or something like that for meetings, trying to get this back and trying to put their financial package together. So hopefully, Charles, explain a little bit about how and it is a new process. that, our goal is to try to put nothing into the atmosphere. We do that with our coal project. We're doing that with our biomass project. That we don't want to put anything. We live here. We don't want to put anything we have to believe and our family has to breathe in the atmosphere, and we don't want to put it on anybody else. So all processes we looked at are processes that takes nearly all, try to get to 100%. Some don't. I know one of the coal processes we're looking at gets 90% out or something like that. But this process explained to us how this plant, now that plant has been designed, the pilot plant and the plant has been designed. Matter of fact, you have a picture on your wall downstairs in your office of the design. So explain to us about that process that this company has access to and has contracts with other companies that has the process patented.
The process starts with taking solid waste, removing through conventional gravity processing, removing that you would do similar to the coal industry, removing with a magnet, removing any iron material, picking out, floating out the plastics, which are light and they'll float in a vessel. Then taking what sinks, which is the heavies, and taking that material, grinding it, reducing it, and making a slurry out of it with about 6% solids and about 94% water. The unique part of it is that it would require drilling a 36-inch hole, 36-inch diameter, approximately 2,000 feet. And what that's called is a gravity pressure vessel. That would be a stainless steel tube or casing going down 2,000 feet. And then within that would be a second casing, which of a smaller diameter. The slurry is injected downhole and a weak dilute acid is added. And what happens is that when you're going down 2,000 feet, you're developing a tremendous static pressure sufficient that it will break cell walls. And wood products, which are the hardest to break down, to form, to make anything that contains cellulose, and that's why trees are hard, and that's why they stand, and why they don't move.
Why they don't move, yeah.
Is that they've got very strong cell walls. But at those pressures, under the influence of a dilute acid, the actual cells pop. Then the fluid starts back up in the inner casing, and there an alkaline is added, which neutralizes the acid. You now come back to the surface, pumping back up and the solution has now been diluted, but the cell walls and structure in it have all been broken. That goes to a conventional fermentation tank, and from there forward, it's a simple process that's used to create an ethanol. You simply use a yeast.
Hey, Charles, don't that sound like moonshine to you?
Yes, it is.
And we got plenty of people qualified.
Yes, it is.
Go ahead.
That's it. You make a mash, and from there forward, you distill it, and you have an ethanol. And so and from the ethanol, that then qualifies for a special tax credit because it has been produced. That is what President Bush used to talked about, that we needed to go toward a cellulosic ethanol. Oh. And the principal advantage of that is it is not taking a food crop and making a fuel from it.
We're talking about this Aggressive company and Zig being in Guam.
Yes.
Guam, we know what Guam is, and we know about the history of Guam during the war and what it meant. As a matter of fact, I got a brother-in-law that was stationed, I had two uncles stationed at Guam. But we understand that they have a solid waste problem like we have in this country. And also, this company is working with Hawaii.
Correct.
And I know Charles was telling me the other day, every day there's a ship coming out of Hawaii to Seattle port bring in their solid waste. So the Navy, now the Navy is the one that controls Guam. They always have, the Navy base. My two uncles in the Marine, my brother-in-law was in the Navy. But they control that island, still do. That's what it's looked at as a Navy base. And so this company would be doing a pilot plant in this country, in Pike County, Kentucky, if it worked out, if it come to fruition. And that plant is already, I said, the pilot plant's designed, the other plant's designed. The location is above the landfill, 50 acres that this county traded with Appalachian Fuels several years ago. And that property is available and sitting up there waiting on them, and that's the reason I said that this company has been in talks in Washington with the federal government and the United States Navy to see. So we're hopeful that, Charles, that you'll get good news on, and that we can move that project forward. We, in regard to biomass, Charles, you've looked at a place on 119 towards Fawn Creek, and you've looked at 25 acres that the governor, that we went up to recently, and the governor had a news conference on the 25 acres. You've also had people up there that looked at that. And that is the wood pellet. What eastern Kentucky mountains are made up of, and that is our forest. And go ahead and give us a brief.
We have approximately in Pike County about 400,000 acres of forest lands, which is a tremendous resource. But taking wood when it's green is about 4,000 BTU per pound, but when dried it's about 8,000 BTU per pound. To give you something comparable, the coal coming from Wyoming is about 8,000 BTU per pound. So it's comparable to wood when it's dried. But wood is a renewable resource. It keeps growing, and coal doesn't from Wyoming. But when the wood is brought in to a plant, it is ground to a fine powder and is chipped, then ground and dried, and then it goes through a pelletizer. And when you squeeze the wood back, the natural lignin binds it back, and it is put into a dryer. And the drying process, when it happens, it allows it to be extruded and come out looking like a pencil, and those are broken, and you end up with particles that are resemble vitamin tablets, and a bag of and then it's bagged, and a bag of pellets is typically what is sold by someone such as Lowe's or Sam's Club in the northeastern United States for use as a home heating fuel.
And they've been having trouble getting that fuel, and people has the stoves already.
Yes. So there's a demand here in the United States. Two, you have utilities in Europe that are under a mandate to use renewable resources, and so we need to have exportable pellets in carload quantities to go for European.
Don't that bring the carbon down in your power generating plants 12% or something like that?
Yes, but it's for EPA purposes, it's considered to be that wood is neutral.
Neutral, yes.
So that it's totally balanced fuel, so there are no emissions in the EPA formula for it.
So we hope that we can finally use our forest. For years our oak trees, they was cut, shipped to Japan. They grew the most expensive mushrooms on them, sent them back and sold it to us. So hopefully that we can get back. And I remember that Mr. York, that used to have the York Furniture Company here, that he put in 10 or 12 sawmills one time because he got tired of going to buying the lumber. and he wanted to put the furniture factory here, and everybody worked trying to get a furniture factory here, but hopefully something will happen as we continue our work in regard to this. Also, the hydro, we have a company in South Carolina, the hydro plant, Dr. Scott. They have a permit, private company, on the Fish Trap Reservoir, and also Flanagan. They have a permit on Flanagan Reservoir. So we were looking at hydro. Then wind, we know they're a private company that's having a study done presently, not on the prestigious mountain of the Pine Mountain State Park, but on the hill this side of it. There's a study going on. But having said that, we want to do all we can do in regard to wind and hydro. Hydro, about 8% of the energy that runs this country today.
Correct.
And that's because the state of Washington, 2/3 of theirs comes from hydro, and then you have the TVA in the east, Tennessee, North Carolina. So, but when you look at wind, and even looking at solar, each one of those are less than 1%. So coal and natural gas, which we have abundance of, is an answer to the future of this country and a way to secure this country.
Coal
also.
is still king.
Going to be king. Coal is going to be king for many, many years. I'm talking about at least 75 to 100 years or even more, because we have the abundance of the reserves of coal.
On behalf of Judge Rutherford and Charles Carlton, I'm Brandon Roberts. Thank you for watching the Pike County Report.